The man who designed the rifle, sitting in a lot of American gun safes, also helped shape the one it was originally meant to challenge. His name was Jim Sullivan. Before Bill Ruger brought him on board, Sullivan had already spent time at Armalite working on the drawings that became the AR-15. Then he moved to Ruger. The assignment he received sounded straightforward on paper. Take the military's M14 battle rifle, scale it down around the new .22 caliber cartridge the Army had adopted, and create a rifle Ruger could offer to both soldiers and civilians. Sullivan delivered the design. He also told Bill Ruger, to his face, that half the plan would never succeed. The military, he warned, was not going to adopt a 5.56 rifle that looked like a traditional hunting gun. If the goal was an Army contract, the rifle needed the visual language of a modern assault rifle. Ruger went the other direction. He insisted on a walnut stock, clean lines, and the overall appearance of a ranch or truck gun rifle. Sullivan was right about the military side. The United States never adopted the Mini-14 as a standard-issue service rifle. Yet the very same friendly appearance that Bill Ruger demanded, against his designer's advice, ended up mattering far more than either man expected. It nearly limited the rifle's early commercial path, and decades later, it helped keep the gun available when many others faced restrictions. That is the story of the Mini-14, a rifle that has spent roughly 50 years being one thing while looking like another. There are pieces of that story Ruger has never printed in the owner's manual. Let's walk through them carefully and factually. Start with what this ordinary-looking rifle actually demonstrated in the field, because the record is more complicated than the reputation. On the morning of April 11, 1986, in a residential area south of Miami, 8 FBI agents confronted 2 bank robbers. The agents carried revolvers, a few pistols, and a shotgun. One of the robbers was armed with a Ruger Mini-14. In the roughly 4.5 minutes that followed, that single rifle delivered a volume of fire the agents could not match with their existing equipment. 2 agents were killed and 5 were wounded. The aftermath led the FBI to reevaluate its sidearm doctrine, move toward higher capacity pistols, and improve body armor, changes that influenced law enforcement agencies across the country. A rifle that looked like a farmer's tool became part of a broader shift in how American police armed themselves. Hold that historical fact next to the other public image of the same gun. If you watched television in the 1980s, you almost certainly saw the Mini-14 on screen, more than almost any other rifle. It was the signature long gun on the A-Team, a program in which the heroes fired thousands of rounds each week, and famously, almost never hit anyone. The rifle became a running joke. Underneath the joke sat a real engineering limitation. Early Mini-14s wore what shooters call a pencil barrel, thin, light, and quick to heat. As that slender barrel warmed, it flexed, and the point of impact drifted. The first cold shot might land close to the aim point. By the 10th round, the group had opened noticeably. Real-world accuracy on those early examples often measured around 5 inches at 100 yards on a good day, and worse once the barrel heated. People joked that the A-Team could not hit anything because the Mini-14 could not either. The observation was not entirely off base. So the rifle carried 2 simultaneous reputations, capable enough to influence a major law enforcement doctrine change, and scattered enough to become a national punchline. The gap between those 2 realities is the real story of the gun. If you prefer the documented history of a rifle over the simplified version printed on the box, you are in the right place. That is what Gun 45 is built for, the details that rarely appear in the official literature. The second point can still cost a buyer real money today. Ruger eventually addressed the accuracy problem, but the company did it quietly, and the way the fix was rolled out created a trap that still sits on used gun racks. Around 2003, Ruger redesigned the rifle, new receiver geometry, a revised gas system intended to reduce barrel whip, and tighter overall tolerances. By 2005, every Mini-14 leaving the factory carried the improved internals, identifiable by a serial number that begins with 580. These later rifles could finally produce honest 2-inch groups, finally living up to the ranch rifle description. What Ruger never publicly highlighted is that the improvement arrived in 2 stages. The earliest 580 series guns received the better internal parts, but still used the old thin pencil barrel. The heavier tapered barrel, the one that visibly thickens from the gas block forward and then tapers toward the muzzle, did not appear until roughly 2007 or 2008. Ruger never assigned a distinct model name, a clear serial number break, or any external marking that separated the 2 barrel profiles. Same model designation, same 580 prefix, 2 very different barrels. That means a buyer can walk into a shop today, see a used 580 series Mini-14, assume it is the fully updated version, and leave with an early thin barrel example that still strings shots once it warms up. Most shop staff will not flag the difference because they often do not know it exists. Here is the single practical tip that is worth more than the rest of this discussion. When you evaluate a used Mini-14, do not stop at the serial number. Look at the barrel itself. If it is a slim, essentially straight tube from the receiver to the muzzle, you are looking at the older profile. If it is visibly thicker near the chamber and tapers as it runs forward, you have the later, more stable barrel. The barrel geometry tells the truth that the paperwork does not. A brief note before the next point. If you spend time thinking about which firearms and calibers make sense to keep on hand when supply chains tighten, that is exactly why I put together the Prepper's Firearms Guide, 105 pages of practical information, price snapshots dated to the month I checked them, and guidance on how to evaluate used guns, so you walk away with the better example. The details are linked below. I will not mention it again. Third fact. Almost no one outside dedicated Ruger enthusiasts knows that this rifle once had a larger sibling that the company quietly abandoned. In the mid-1980s, Ruger developed a scaled-up mini-chambered for the full-power .308 Winchester cartridge. They called it the XGI. The concept was to offer a lower-priced alternative to the M1A, the civilian version of the M14, built around the Mini's simple and generally reliable action. Ruger listed it in the catalog, announced it for 1985, showed it to the press, and then it disappeared. Not a single example was sold to the public. By most accounts, the larger cartridge generated more pressure and stress than the scaled action could reliably handle, and accuracy never reached an acceptable standard. Rather than release a flawed product, Ruger canceled the project, the Maxi 14 that never reached the market. That failure, however, is the reason another rifle most of you already know exists. When the .308 version proved too demanding, Ruger looked for a middle cartridge the existing design could manage and settled on the Russian 7.62x39, the same cartridge used in the AK platform. That round runs at lower pressure. The result was the Mini-30, introduced in 1987 and still cataloged today as a practical deer and utility rifle. The Mini-30 exists because the .3008 experiment did not work. In a very real sense, a gun many owners keep is the practical consolation prize for a project that could not be made reliable. While we are looking behind the curtain, one more manufacturing detail flips the most common criticism of the Mini-14. Critics have long dismissed the receiver as cast, poured into a mold rather than machined from a solid billet, and therefore somehow inferior. What that criticism rarely mentions is that Ruger's investment in casting is a major reason the company reached the scale it occupies today. Bill Ruger acquired a foundry, Pine Tree Castings, specifically so critical parts could be produced by that method. The company became so proficient that Pine Tree eventually supplied precision castings to industries far outside firearms. The Mini-14 served as an early showcase for a production approach that helped build one of the largest firearms manufacturers in the United States. The feature often labeled cheap is the same feature that helped make Ruger a dominant name. That kind of buried manufacturing history is the material Gun 45 exists to surface. Subscribe if you want the next teardown delivered to you. Fourth point, and the heaviest, because it involves the man whose name is on the rifle asking Congress for a restriction. William B. Ruger, Bill Ruger, founder of the company and one of the notable firearms designers of the 20th century, sent a letter on March 30th, 1989, to every member of Congress. It was not a letter defending unrestricted ownership. It proposed a new limit. Instead of endless debate over which rifles counted as assault weapons, simply prohibit magazines holding more than 15 rounds. Ban the high-capacity magazine, he argued, and the argument over the rifles themselves could be largely avoided. The founder of a major American gun company placed a magazine capacity proposal on congressional letterhead. Many gun owners were angry, and that anger left a lasting mark on the Mini-14 community. For years afterward, factory Ruger high-capacity magazines were difficult or impossible for civilians to obtain. Owners who wanted 20 or 30-round magazines were forced to rely on aftermarket products that often fed unreliably. That is the historical root of the advice every experienced Mini-14 owner still gives: use only factory Ruger magazines. The practical range tip traces directly to a 1989 letter. Fairness requires the other side of the argument. Bill Ruger's defenders note that the political pressure in Washington in 1989 was intense. Congress was going to act, and some of the proposals circulating were more sweeping than a 15-round limit. They describe Ruger's magazine suggestion as an attempt to create a firebreak, the least damaging option on the table, to head off broader rifle bans. You can accept or reject that interpretation, but it belongs in a complete account. What matters for a buyer today is simpler. Bill Ruger died in 2002. The company that still carries his name now sells factory high-capacity magazines and publicly supports the Second Amendment. The choice made in 1989 belongs to that moment. The company's current posture is different. The story finally connects when we reach the 1994 federal assault weapons ban. The detail almost no one fully understands is how that law actually operated. It did not ban rifles according to their internal function. It banned them according to a checklist of external features: pistol grip, folding stock, bayonet lug, flash hider, and similar military-style appointments. The AR-15 was affected. The Mini-14, which fires the same cartridge as many AR-15s and operates on the same basic self-loading principle, was not merely overlooked. It was written into the law by name on the list of specifically exempted firearms, provided it lacked the folding stock. In plain wood furniture, it remained legal, while its mechanical cousin was restricted. Return to the opening of this account. Jim Sullivan warned Bill Ruger that a traditional hunting rifle appearance would cost the company a military contract. He was correct. It did. Yet that exact same traditional appearance, the walnut stock and ranch rifle profile Ruger insisted upon, is precisely what carried the Mini-14 through the regulatory period that restricted many other designs. The visual choice that ended its military aspirations is the same visual choice that preserved its civilian availability. The statute regulated the external costume, not the underlying mechanism, and the Mini-14 was wearing the costume the law left alone. During the ban years, it became, for many buyers, the semi-automatic rifle that could still be purchased. Some owners then added aftermarket furniture that restored a more tactical appearance. Honesty requires acknowledging the other side of that ordinary look as well. The same unthreatening profile is part of the reason the Mini-14 has appeared in certain high-profile criminal incidents that later led other countries to restrict or ban it. That fact is part of the public record. It does not change what the rifle in a lawful owner's safe actually is: a tool that, when used legally and responsibly, remains reliable and practical. An accurate history simply includes the full range of outcomes the design has been associated with. Here is where the entire account settles. The Mini-14 was conceived as a dual-purpose rifle by a designer who believed the dual purpose could not succeed. In different ways, he was both right and wrong. It never became a standard military rifle because of its gentle appearance. It still influenced a major shift in American law enforcement equipment. It earned a reputation for poor accuracy, then quietly improved once the redesign took hold. Its cast receiver was mocked as inexpensive, while the casting expertise behind it helped build a major American manufacturer. And the friendly face that cost it the Army contract is the same face that protected it during the 1994 ban. Every chapter of this rifle's history occupies the space between what it appears to be and what it actually is. The practical bottom line you can act on is straightforward. A modern Mini-14, with the later tapered barrel, is a legitimate 2-inch rifle at practical ranges. Reliable, handy, and worth owning. It is no longer the inaccurate joke of its early reputation, nor is it a precision match gun. If you are buying one, examine the barrel profile before you pay, and feed it factory Ruger magazines. The political letter written in 1989 is historical context, not the company's present position. Judge the rifle on the rifle itself. That is the material that rarely appears in the brochure, and that competing marketing departments prefer not to discuss. So tell me in the comments, what is the real story with your Mini-14? Which barrel profile did yours arrive with, thin or tapered, and how does it actually group? I especially want to hear from owners who were shopping for rifles in 1994. Did you choose a Mini-14 because it remained available when others did not? People who lived through that period know details no specification sheet can capture, and I read every comment. If you want more of these straightforward teardowns, the documented history, the manufacturing details, and both sides of the story on the guns people actually keep, subscribe and join the growing group of viewers who prefer straight information over the sanitized version. This is Tony with Gun 45. Stay informed, handle every firearm responsibly, and judge each design on the evidence rather than the reputation alone.